Welcome to the definitive mega masterclass of Maverick.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Stop, I need more stuff. Can't see, I need more stuff. And now I go. I'm keeping up with the Joneses. I'm keeping up with the Joneses.
3,
Keeping up with the
2.
Joneses. All right.
Hello and welcome to it. My fucking dog. Brando!
That is
Stop!
Excellent. Excellent.
He waited exactly on time.
He
All
knows
right.
what he's doing.
Couldn't be better. Couldn't be better.
All right, here we go. In 3. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Yo, with you as always, but the least important of all the people here. Let's just dive into it, Zach. We got the Mega Maverick Masterclass episode today.
Yeah. Let me just straight off introduce. We've got Dougs from Douges on Twitch, and we've got STRASSDADDY here. Guys, welcome to the cast.
Happy to be here. Excellent being here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Phil. Very cool to be here alongside Mark to talk Mav.
Yeah. So the plan today is to talk Maverick, which is something that Phil and I don't normally talk about non-blue decks. So this is a great kind of a crossover episode where everyone's going to get a chance to find out more about Magic the Gathering that Phil and I don't necessarily play all that often.
The extent that I play Maverick is pestering these two gentlemen about Samwise Gamgee.
Yes.
So what we're going to do is we're just going to hand it over, starting with Mr. STRASSDADDY himself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started playing the archetype of Maverick, and then we'll pass it over to Dukes.
Cool. So I was destined to be a nerd. I grew up, my dad had a comic shop, and I think 86 or something, he had the comic shop, and they got Magic and Fallen Empires. So I was a little kid with cards, didn't really know what I was doing, but I had Shivan Dragon and, Sarah Angel. Then he lost the shop. Then he started working at another shop many years later during the Mercadian block, got into it. Then he stopped having that job, so I had nowhere to play. And then got back into it 2008 and picked up Burn, and then Goblins, and then I got robbed, and then I bought Burn, and then I bought Goblins again, and then eventually created my own silly archetype, and eventually it became Maverick.
Yeah, I started off as a Legacy Death and Taxes player who wanted to splash for cards like Choke and Gadok, and the small splash for green wasn't enough, so moved into Maverick. Found a lot of Mark's content and a lot of content out there, and yeah, haven't looked back since. It's very cool to be playing a creature-based deck in Legacy in 2023. It's not something people you typically think about when you think about Legacy. Probably not the most powerful thing you can do, but definitely one of the most rewarding.
We should note that Dukes is the founder of GreenSunsUnit.com, where anybody can go to find all of their Maverick needs. One thing that Zach and I talk about a lot on the show is the legacy power level thing to do with any given archetype. So as the Miracles Bro myself, usually that goes back and forth between Counterbalance or specifically Terminus, depending on the metagame. So for example, right now we're in a Bowmaster post Lord of the Rings metagame. So if there's going to be a lot of bodies on the board, Terminus gets more appealing. And so I move towards Terminus, and that's what I advocate for other Miracles players. And then similarly for Zach on the 8-cast side, obviously Urza Saga, arguably one of the pound-for-pound best cards in Legacy that I'm sure we'll get into on the Maverick side. So from your guys' opinion, having played Maverick for so many years, at this point in 2023 Legacy, what would you say is the Legacy power level thing to do from a Maverick player's seat?
I want to hear Dougal first on this because he and I are similar, but I kind of feel like I'm more narrow-minded, so I want to hear the honest opinion here.
I would say it's still a bit of a 1-2 punch. So when I think of kind of the unfair things that Maverick can do, it's Thalia and Wasteland, or it's Mother of Runes and Gadok, or Mother of Runes and Collect Oof. So it's kind of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, where you typically need to rely on more than just one thing. But Yeah, a lot of it is still, in my opinion, the disruption part is based on creatures, but things like Urza Saga, Minsk and Boo, you're definitely having access to other ways to win games and create some value. That's more than just the sort of typical 1-for-1 we see in Wasteland Your Land or Swords of Plowshares Your One Creature. So access to that is pretty huge.
So I'm going to surprise you here, Dougal, but I think Punishing Fire is what the deck wants to be doing. So for those who don't know, I only play Punishing Maverick. If somebody comes on stream as like a guest stream, I won't play the pun. I think I've done it maybe once or twice without it on my own volition. I started playing Maverick before Thalia was a card. And back then, it may surprise you, Wrath of God was the only real board sweep, or Day of Judgment, but really Wrath of God. So that
Strass, just to dive in for context for everybody listening, Thalia came out in the Innistrad block at the same time that Miracles did. So before Terminus and before Thalia, the entire Legacy metagame was entirely different. Avacyn Restored really brought in a shift in Legacy's trajectory between Terminus and Thalia and Grizzlebrand all entering the format with that block.
Sort of a post 2012
that's great
metagame.
context.
Yeah.
Supreme Verdict, and even later Toxic Deluge and Dead of Winter. So I played the deck in a very controlling way of the longer the game goes, the better it gets for me. So I really like the grindy mindset of less about the tax and more about getting value. And instead of playing a card like Force of Will that 2-for-1s yourself to most of the time stay within the tempo of the game, just play all value spells and treat it like Jund, or that's been the mindset for me.
So additional context from what Strass just said for those not in the know. Many of you are, but Punishing Fire combos with Grove of the Burn Willows, where Grove, you tap it for red mana, your opponent gains a life, and then Punishing Fire lets you rebuy the Punishing Fire from your graveyard when that happens by using that red mana. So you effectively get to regrow your Punishing Fire with Grove of the Burn Willows on the table infinitely. So hearing your guys' past, we learned that STRASSDADDY's a burn player into Goblins player into burn player as his history, and then he moves towards playing a burn spell in his Maverick builds. And Dougs was a Death and Taxes player and leans heavier on the taxes strategy between protecting hate bears. Can you guys say or talk about what the differences are in terms of the archetypes that you like sitting across the most and what you fear the most, and how moving harder into either Punishing Fire or the hate bear strategy either enables you to be more flexible in your deck building and changing up for new cards, or restrictions thereof?
You go, Mark.
Okay, I'll go this time. Anybody? Okay, so coming from a paper background, you don't see a lot of the combo decks. People, at least in the experience that I have here on the East Coast of the US, in Maryland and in Philadelphia, I really have not seen too many people going turn one, kill you. And I just imagine the people who, after work, pre-COVID, drove all the way to the LGS, sat down, and the game's over in 5 minutes, and everybody else is playing, and you just have to like sit there and wait. So I think like MTGO really gives those combo players the ability to just jam games. And coming from a paper background, I get emotional against turn one kill you decks. And since I'm not often playing Thalia these days, the last thing I want to see is a deck that's doing something totally degenerate turn one, even turn two or turn three. And any deck that wants to play the actual game of Magic the Gathering, like 1 or 2 spells per turn, 1 or 2 lands per turn, that's what I want to play. And I'm looking at you, Zach, Mr. 8cast.
Hey, man, I'm drawing 1 or 2 cards per turn.
Before we pass it over to Dukes, I just want to point out that STRASSDADDY did finish. It was 12th place, right, at SCG Baltimore?
I think 11th, and I'm
11th place.
I'm pissed. that you demoted me to 12th.
Couldn't even get to
Dude,
top 10 though.
there is something glorious about being in the top 11. Was your tournament mostly comprised of facing what would be considered fair decks?
Jeez. One reanimate deck and the Cephalid Breakfast deck, but that's like a turn. It can turn to you, but it's often not going to. And it's creature removal, which I run a lot of. So I think for those combo decks, that's one of the best if you're not going to play the taxes kind of build.
Oh, that's actually interesting. After Dukes gives his lowdown, I want to actually discuss about the differences of like stack-based combo versus creature-based combo and how that differentiates your card choices too. But Dukes, please go ahead.
I would say very close to Mark in that a lot of players in paper, for me, play more grindy decks. I think people just generally like playing Magic and no hard feelings against combo players, but the average amount of turns you get against combo is obviously a lot less than those of the mid-range plans. But online, there is a lot of combo, and that's generally because people like to grind leagues with fast decks. So when it comes to something like a sideboard, it's hard to recommend the sideboard that I play online in front of players for their paper Magic, because it's probably a whole different experience. But that's also good because it gets people thinking about what they need to sideboard, how to like target a local meta game. I do like the longer games. I love the 8-cast matchup. I love the lands matchup. I even don't mind the sort of blue-white Stoneforge style control decks. Not so much the 4-color decks. I find that sometimes the game goes too long where they just really start to outgrind you. But yeah, I think when you look at online, there are a lot of combo decks, and my sideboards typically run only free and 1 mana spells sometimes. So free spells and things like Force of Vigor, Mindbreak Trap, Leyline, Fairy, Surgical, Endurance, and then, maybe Deafening Silence, because a lot of the time, if you do want to kind of survive online, you have to have that early interaction, and turn 2 plays in things like Thalia or Gadogteeg or Collector Oof are great, but you have to get to turn 2, and it's not as easy as just being able to untap sometimes. So yeah, not a big fan of playing against the fast combo decks, but it is part of Legacy, so you got to be ready for it.
As Strass had mentioned a moment ago, the difference of like having moved away from Thalia, Duke is still on the more prison style builds, although I've seen Duke also experiment with things like Esper Sentinel and other cards of that nature. In Maverick's trajectory of adding Thalia to the deck, maybe Thalia is not required for the deck, moving into where we had a whole era of Renin 6 before it got banned, and that actually helped out decks like Storm, because now all of the fair decks were now playing this deck that was just better on the grind. What happened to, two-part question, what happened to Stoneforge Mystic? And what cards do you guys consider absolutely non-negotiable in Maverick? At what point are what cards, if you sat down from a player and they didn't play this card, you'd be like, well, it's not Maverick because it doesn't have these cards?
I'm gonna go with Punishing Fire. No.
Reasonable.
Yeah. No, for me, non-negotiable, I think if you cut 4th sword and cut it to 3, I think that's crazier than even trimming a Green Sun Zenith. Especially in this day and age. I think swords is the reason to play white. I think swords is arguably the best. Swords of Plowshares, I should say, is arguably one of the best spells in the meta. I think Pyroblast is a card that I don't want to leave home without in the board. I think there are just so many blue decks, and it is tempo positive most of the time. In other words, you spend 1 mana, and they often spend 1 or more lands. If you hit a cantrip, great, but a Murktide's 2, a Teferi's 3, a Show and Tell. So it's tempo positive that way. It's a 1-for-1. And Stoneforge, so there's two players I'm going to give a shout out on that. 3 really. Say Harry 1232. My buddy Carador, that's his handle, and Clips for Life. still frequently play with Stoneforge Mystic, probably 30 to 40% of the time. Not every time with Cauldra. Don't have much of an opinion because I think Saga is better in the deck. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Dougal?
What makes Maverick Maverick? I would say Green Sun Zenith. And I think another way to kind of look at it is, does the deck look like a deck that's going to use Zenith to its advantage to shut down some other decks? So it has disruptive creatures. And also, is it a deck that just kind of wins through combat damage or concessions? That's probably what I would say is Maverick these days. But it is tough. I would say also green-white X decks, but you're definitely seeing less white these days. People have moved away from Mother of Runes, have tried out cards like Esper Sentinel, but haven't always sticked with them. Thalia's, definitely showing her old age. Teague has seen some comeback, but obviously isn't kind of the mandatory card it used to be. So a lot of the time you see now the white is obviously for Swords to Plowshares, still the premier removal spell in Legacy, next to Punishing Fire.
Mm-hmm.
But Knight of the Reliquary is even getting cut a little bit just to make room for other really good 3-drops or other creatures hitting the format. And Stoneforge Mystic is obviously in there as well as just a white creature. So I think it's a few things. I think that there's no real need for the beater in Maverick. You have a lot of big creatures already, and Mark does that as well through Urza's Saga with constructs, which is nice. It is typically card advantage, but sometimes if you get a Cauldra or a Batterskull, that card just rots in your hand. Is it really a 2-for-1? In saying that as well, it's a bit of a mana sink. It does take a fair bit of time. So if you are searching up a Jide, that's 6 mana, 2 for Stoneforge, 2 to put in, 2 to equip. So it might come down to how important in your local metagame is it to be able to search up a card like Jide? Like, is that going to be having a massive effect on most of the games you play against? And the other thing is, in a deck with Green Sun Zenith, every non-green creature has to have a really good reason for being there, because every slot that you take away from even one green creature is 5 virtual copies that you're missing out of with Green Sun Zenith, which is huge. So saying like, is 2 Stoneforge better than, playing a Collector Oof in the main deck, which now you have 5 copies of, or something else, it's really hard to do. So I'm a huge proponent in maximizing the power of Green Sun Zenith, because obviously the more different creatures in there, it just makes it better in how it scales, from mana acceleration with Dryad Arbor all the way up to, say, Questing Beast or something else. It's really hard to kind of take away its ability to potentially turn off artifacts or destroy an artifact or enchantment, or damage can't be prevented. It's I think it's really hard in 2023, where you really need your Green Sun Zenith to be as flexible as possible to not use those slots. I'd say 4 slots, usually like 2 Stoneforge, 2 equipment, or 3 Stoneforge, 2 equipment, for either additional removal or Green Sun's targets.
From my side of the table, where I'm always going to be casting Ponder Brainstorm and not letting go of the fact that Sensei's Divining Top got banned, when I think of Maverick, I think obviously of Green Sun Zenith, but I think of it as Green Sun Zenith as a pillar of the format that sort of is the backbone of a lot of decks. Do you guys have a point of view on how far you consider the bleed between Maverick as we know it, Punishing Maverick, or Green-White Maverick, or maybe even Obzon Maverick, and where it fits along the axis between something like Cradle Control, which is more of a black-green Green Sun Zenith deck, and Green-White Depths, which is also a Green Sun Knight of the Reliquary deck that looks to finish with Dark Depths, and what I imagine most people would categorize more as a Dark Depths deck than a Knight of the Reliquary Maverick-style deck. But they all hinge on Green Sun Zenith being their backbone. Where do you guys sit on the power level of each one, and why you choose to stay in the lane of Maverick as opposed to veering off into one of those two?
One thing I'll say is when you play a game like Doom, you have the skill difficulty at the start from like easy to like nightmare. And I definitely consider Maverick to be the nightmare choice for Legacy when it comes to like green decks, because the one big difference between Critical Control, Depths, and Maverick is that Maverick doesn't have that typical I win button of Natural Order for Atraxa or Dark Depths U. It has more subtle ones like Green Suns for Collector Oof against potentially an 8-cast player in game 1 who doesn't want to play it out, or Wasteland and then Wasteland again with Ramanap or Knight. So it's definitely changed a bit over the last few years, where these hate bears have become less of a stop sign and more of a speed bump. So say old school Ant probably couldn't beat game 1 Teague, but now you have a lot of decks that even if you play a turn 2 Collector Oof, which is kind of the go-to hate bear for a lot of these decks to shut them down and try to get that free kind of I win in game 1, they still have ways to storm off and use the artifacts to storm, or wish for some sort of sideboard card like Grape Shot, which makes it a lot harder to not just have, the ability just to say, oh, here's Natural Order, or you didn't do anything in your turn, so I'm going to actually use the Knight to go and get Dark Depths this turn, find the Dark Depths, and swing for 20. So I think there's that part. Also a huge shout out to Newton, who's taken Elves completely away from Elves towards a deck that does have a small amount of disruption in the Green Suns package, but also keeps that I win button of, okay, I have Collector Oof my deck. If that's not relevant against you, I'm probably going to sack this to a Grist to make it relevant, or sack it to a Natural Order to win the game. So, I would say that the biggest difference is that ability just to kind of win the game out of nowhere and make sure that every card in your deck has a role in that. You can turn that Collect Oof against the mirror in Elves into removal through Grist, or into a win con through Natural Order.
I like it. While you were talking and listening to it, I started to almost picture a Venn diagram, and I'm going to add one other deck. So we have Maverick, we have Cradle Control or Elves, we'll say Newton version, and then we have
I should probably give some context. That Cradle Control, for those who don't know, is the evolution of Elves, where it plays Fiend Artisan to essentially play Green Sun Zenith copies 5 through 8, but Fiend Artisan opens up the Green Sun Zenith package to non-green creatures, and therefore there's other controlling elements that you can play, like Opposition Agent and such. But it is effectively a Green Sun Zenith creature-based deck that is looking to interact in some capacity with your opponent to play a mid-rangey, grindy game.
Yeah, replacing a lot of the Elves and Glimpse to accomplish that. So Cradle Control, so Maverick, we'll say Green-White Maverick, and then we'll say Cradle Control, and then we're going to say Depths, but then we're going to talk about the red-headed stepchild who disappeared from the metagame. Loam, shout out to Lomer Boy. That's another style. So I think that there is some overlap, and I'd say Maverick would be the prison. And I think Maverick and Loam share a lot, especially the versions I play. And then I think Depths and Elves, kind of giving you that I win button, share a little bit too. They're both pretty toolboxy. And I think I like the Loam style of let's make this game go long, and to talk to the difficulty of the game, the nightmare thing. Dahlia can be a free win. Loam gets Chalice, which can be a free win. Elves gets Natural Order, which could be a free win. I'm opting for no free wins in my deck. Just let's fight. Like let's just we're making choices here. That's what I like. So yeah, I think don't want to forget about Loam. That definitely is a deck that I think is still playable if you're good at it, and maybe there's some new innovators there. Get back on it, Vuk and Mots, please.
And you kind of helped me segue into a topic that Strass had actually wanted to talk about, which is specifically being a specialist on a particular archetype, and given how much bleed there is across the spectrum of legacy decks. So if we, like you guys were mentioning, if we were to dissect the Green Sun Zenith range of combo, prison, control, aggro, that you sort of get a sense of like other decks that it touches through, but adds Green Sun Zenith. So like the Duke style very clearly leans from a D&T style deck that's moving harder into green for that style package. STRASSDADDY similarly, but moving away from the prison elements to be a little bit more grindy, a little bit more control deck, very Jundy, like he explained before. Once you move into depths, you're starting to get into combo, and there are other elements that you can get with combo decks, particularly if you add Life in the Loam, and then you get into like very long stuff. Like I remember there was a Field of the Dead, Night of the Reliquary deck a long time ago. That has sort of fallen out of the metagame as of late, but I remember losing to it a lot. When you guys are
well, Phil, before we go,
go ahead.
Too far into that, I want to say, Stress, you had a great point about these 4 decks in the Venn diagram, and one of the things we will do is we'll post those lists below, and we'll post them on Moxfield. And a quick word from our sponsor, Moxfield, while we're doing that.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Getting back onto the topic of being a specialist with a given archetype. In my head, you guys are the go-to guys for Maverick. I get that you're on 2 distinct lanes, like as we've already discussed, but do you guys get a sense from the Legacy community at large that there is an onus on you to constantly be innovating the archetype, or is that something that you naturally enjoy to begin with? Or do you feel a sense of like, I get this sometimes with Miracles. People ask me all the time, like, Phil, is it time to move on to Breakfast? Like, maybe it's not. Maybe you just play the blue-white combo deck instead of the blue-white control deck. Maybe it's time, Phil. And sometimes I agree with them because I see the deck winning a lot, and I'm like, maybe I should put my Tundras towards auto win buttons. But then I'm also like, but I really want to terminus the shit out of people. I really want to just play a counterbalance. Do you guys get the sense that do you always think that you're going to be a Maverick enthusiast through and through, or do you think that there is at a certain point, if the data doesn't show that it is maximizing your win percentages, would you move away from the archetype or innovate towards something that's out of your wheelhouse, a la adding those free win buttons and be moving more into a combo-based style of Maverick as the format progressively gets more powerful?
I'm going to go first because I'm going to shout out Mark in this part. I definitely move around. When Oko was around and a few other cards that just made other decks that little bit better than tier 1, it was quite hard to sorry, I'm not going to cry. It was really hard to stay on Maverick. So I did, lean into depths. I really wanted that I win button, that way to kind of close out a game without our opponent finding the time to really take advantage of those, card advantage or other cards that come online. So I've definitely moved around a lot, but Mark is someone who is stuck with Maverick through and through, which is very cool. Even through the hard times, it's really nice to see someone who's that dedicated. And even though he stays on Maverick, he does try out new things. Obviously, it's gone a long way now on the Saga build, which is very cool. And playing some different cards that people don't typically play with because you want to see them. I think a lot of players these days just see a card and go, "Oh, that's not playable." But I really enjoy players who actually put the time in to show either why a card isn't playable or, hold up, actually playing this card, it's nuts. So we're going to play this. And I think Mark's definitely one of those players. So although I've definitely moved around to depths and other decks, I usually try to stay within the green-white pie of Legacy. It's nice to always know that if I see Strass on Twitch, it's going to be Maverick.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Many years ago, I played WoW, and I was the second best Resto Shaman on the server, and it meant so much to me. I would talk to people in my social life of how cool it is that I'm in this guild, and I could heal people. And No one gives a shit. That's been so many years removed. And this
That's why I play Druid, man.
Yeah, there you go.
I can do it all.
Hybrids, I just couldn't tank, but yeah, I really that meant something to me. And eventually, the more I've lived, I was a Division 1 wrestler as an example. And the more that you live sometimes, the more at least I live, the more you realize it's all nothing. We're all just on this planet just going by, and we're all going to die someday. And you make these relationships and you have these connections, and just do what you like. And if you think that somehow being the trophy leader or winning a tournament is going to mean something many years later, it might a little bit to you, but the days are going to go by and people are just going to kind of forget. And, eventually that'll be something where you're old and nobody even knows what you're talking about if you live long enough. And to me, it's a long way of saying, like, why?
Maverick, we all die alone.
Yeah, we all die alone.
Yo, I'm just gonna say I love the philosophical turn that we have shifted into, and I don't understand why you've never splashed black so you could play Nihilist Maverick.
There it is, yeah. It's time, but it's just like, do what you like, and if you really like, the idea that you're gonna come up with the best deck and brew it and beat everybody, then great. We need people like that. Guys who are hyper competitive. It's awesome. But I think, like, I kind of had that with other things in my life. And now at this point, after all these years, this is the deck that I enjoy the most. I identify with it. I feel close to it. I feel a community. And I've had quite a few people pick up the deck, which is awesome, and innovate and help me. And that community is, it's what keeps me going, I'll say. Playing into the Ren and Sixes, or even at Tybalt, or jerks like you with Terminus, like playing a creature deck against 4 main deck and instant speed, 1 mana Wrath of Gods. I did it, and I top 8 an event when that was the number 1 deck and Dig Through Time was legal. It's just got to hang in there.
Yeah, I think hanging in there is a big part of it. I know for me, the dark times were like when Treasure Cruise was really big, and I was on Rug Delver, and like every one of my threats was like needs cards in the graveyard, but also everyone else was drawing 3 cards, and like I continued to feel the pull to like need to play that card, but at the same time like knowing that like it's just not who I am, and I mean I think if you stick with a deck for long enough, you see those cycles of like your deck being complete crap, and then like something changes in the meta, and the reps that you put in between to like really grind and learn that deck end up paying off in dividends later on, when you didn't just jump to like whatever the new hot thing was. And for me, that was when Ren and 6 came out, and I was already like, oh yeah, I want to Wasteland Stifle and Ren and 6, and I had like a little moment in the sun from that. And I think sticking to the deck that you want to play, even when it is bad, there's something to be said about that.
I want to point out. I just want to I was called upon by STRASSDADDY, and as the instant speed 4x Terminus guy. So I would like to respond. I actually think that us on fair decks without the combo win button actually makes us closer than further apart, even though I am trying to rat the shit out of your board. Because what you would explain from like what Zach just said of like, it was rough for a little while. Man, when Initiative was the best deck, boys, playing a creatureless control deck was not the path. It was not the way forward when they were on the uninteractable mechanic with 4 Cavern of Souls. So we are all nihilists now. I want to talk about 2 things actually, particularly because I still feel like, even though I feel like I chat with you guys relatively often. I watch all of Dude's material on YouTube. I watch Strass on Twitch all the time. Like I watch a lot of Maverick content, even though I've never actually sleeved the deck up myself. But so I've thought about it a lot, and I still think, like, what do you guys consider to be the ideal progression through the first 3 or 4 turns of every game sitting down in the dark. Like you sit down in an event, you're like, ideally every game starts like this. This is how my curve plays out. Like as I'm keeping hands, I'm looking to do what?
The first thing up is, I think it's very hard to say, like, you know, does this hand beat a turn 1 combo? No, you're not a Force of Will deck, so you kind of have to just put that aside. I usually look at what the plan is. Like, do we have mana acceleration? If we have fetches, what colors do we need? Do we have a plan against unfair decks? Do we have a plan against fair decks? So something like, say, 2 lands, Green Sun Zenith for ramp, and then, you know, Thalia or another Green Suns for, say, Collect Oof, and then a Swords is pretty perfect because it's mana. I'm getting my mana online. If my opponent does something like a, you know, turn 1 Preordain, which these days is a little bit more combo side, than having, you know, Green Suns for Oof is great. But it is tough because it's a deck where you can definitely draw the wrong side. So even if you have a hand that's set up to draw, you know, anything you draw into, you might just not draw into something to put your mana into. But yeah, it is tough. I actually have started using Moxfield before games as kind of a warm-up, where I'll load my deck and then load a few hands and then just talk through them, and just be like, okay, would I keep this hand against Delver? Would I keep this hand against a combo deck? And would I keep this hand in a blind? And that's a really nice way to, like, kind of just warm up, because as I get older, I'm finding I have to stretch before I go hiking, and I kind of find that doing that sort of just like mental game early on can really help out and make it a bit more of just something you always go to for every hand you keep, because you kind of you have to have a plan. You're very sorcery speed in your reaction, that you can't just, you know, instantly change it too often. You know, you have to get the Collector Oof into play before they play their artifacts and tap them. You have to get your Gaddock Teeg or your Thalia down before your opponent casts their spells that, you know, obviously tax them. So yeah, it's tough in the blind, but I would say make sure you have some sort of plan and go forth and conquer.
I like it. I like it, man. I think that's a good explanation. In the list I play, I'd say any hand that functions, you kind of have to keep. I run way too many 3-drops. I don't run that many 2-drops, and my mana base is kind of a mess. So on the blind, if it would work in a gold fishing situation, like, you know, on Moxfield, like you're saying, where you just draw a hand and you're actually able to, like, play the game. Yeah, I'm probably keeping it. I think only 3-drops in hand and lands might be a mull. And if it has Sylvan Library, it's an auto keep.
I actually, yeah, that's something that I want to jump upon, because as somebody who loves selection, I love card selection. I love, even if it's the illusion of having more agency to reduce the variance from game to game, I'm an absolute sucker for that. I'm the dude who's trying to jam more than 12 cantrips in my deck, right? Like I want all air and then Terminus. That's it. Maybe Entreat the Angels, but like the more air, the better in my mind, right? Like I love having control over things. And I recently saw a Dukes video where you were playing 3 Sylvan Library. And one aspect that I feel like when I've heard Reed Duke playing Jund, or I hear you guys talking about Maverick, it always, like, I'll watch STRASSDADDY, and like the second that he's got like, oh, Sylvan Library, like that was the nutter butter draw. Like it seems like having that kind of selection, even outside of blue, is so immensely valuable. But I so rarely see the deck that's playing 3 or 4 Sylvan Library, like the time where, you know, Dukes, if you want to talk about that league that you played with it and how it performed. But the same way that Green Sun Zenith has been a backbone for Maverick for as long as I can remember, it's always been interesting to me that Sylvan Library never found that same space to be a pivotal, like, part of the skeleton. Is there a reason for that? Is it just too clunky, or is it something that has been explored and just like there hasn't been the commitment to it to like fully flesh that out?
I want to build on that 1 second as well, Phil, because it's been like 20 years since I've had more than 1 Sylvan Library and play at the same time. That's, you draw 2 extra cards each time, so it's like you're drawing 4 cards.
No, you resolve them first. So if 2 were to go on the stack, you draw 2, You decide whether or not you want to pay 4 life per card, and then you resolve the next one. So you'll see 2 cards deep if you paid 8, which, I mean, honestly, who's not here to full send? Am I right? Like, don't be a coward, pay 8. But if you were to put 2 back, then you would resolve the second one by just looking at 2 cards again. So you have to resolve them in order. You don't draw.
Yeah, it's been
like 6
I said,
cards
it's
with
been
3
20
Sylvan
years
Libraries.
since I've had more than one in play. Not since I played Urnham Armageddon.
However, having them stacked that way does mean that you can do instant speed shuffle effects. So you can like put 2 back before the second one resolves. You can fetch and then look at 2 fresh cards. So there are some tricks.
Okay.
Yeah, funnily enough, the earlier versions of Sylvan Library had a 0 activation cost.
The 5th edition
people look at
version,
it
yeah.
and think that you can needle it, which, to be fair, you can play 50 Needle and name Sylvan Library. It's just not going to do anything. But yeah, I would say there's a few things over time. Sylvan Library not being a creature is just a small thing in a creature deck. It is something that you need to untap with to get value out of. It does run into draw hate, so things like Narset or Hull Breacher or Leovold or now Orcish Bowmasters. And yeah, it's a card that, again, kind of takes that slot of sort of Stoneforge Mystic or the non-green creatures or removal. I really like 2, but 3 is really good as well, because I believe with 3, the chance of having it in your opening hand is 33%. And once you find 1, you can use it to make sure you don't draw the others, which is nice. And if you do have 2, if you do, say, keep a hand with 1 and then draw 1 in your first opening turn, it's, 1 less. It's 1 backup for, like, counter magic or prismatic ending, which is a big card these days. And although prismatic ending is a nice 1-for-1, it is 1 less prismatic ending than for your actual creatures, which is great as well. I typically, even if the cards on top aren't great, I typically try to at least pay 4 life on the first library to replace it, so that if it is removed by something like a prismatic ending, I have got some value out of it.
That's interesting.
But I don't always pay 8 because you only have so much life. And if I do get a shuffle effect, I do want to be able to pay that 4 for cards that are meaningful. But making sure I get the early 2-for-1 if I can is pretty relevant. And Maverick doesn't have too much life gain with things like Scavenging Ooze being taken out of the deck for, cards like Endurance, but there are versions with things like Shadow Spear, swords. If your creature gets swords, there's nothing better against miracles than your opponent's swords in your 12/12 Knight and you untapping and just drawing an extra 2 cards. But yeah, against a deck like Delver, it could be really key to look back and say, well, if I didn't actually pay that extra 4 life, I would have had an additional turn, which is pretty huge. So the more aggressive the format gets, probably the worse Sylvan Library gets, because you can untap with a library, but you might be at 12 life or even lower.
Would you say that the additions of Force of Vigor out of the sideboard and Endurance in the main board, so having the Force of Will effect of additional green cards that are pitchable to these pitch effects, does that change the calibration on how many Sylvan Libraries you consider playing when you're like putting a deck together, or is it not sufficient enough to warrant a change in numbers?
Yeah, I would say it's a bonus. It's nice to have those extra green pips in the deck for cards like Endurance. And against the deck where you might want to Endurance turn 0, the library is probably going to be a bit too slow anyway. So it's kind of nice to have that card that, although you don't really want to 2-for yourself, you also don't want to lose. And you kind of know that library is just not going to be part of this game. So, yeah.
So I think Dougal hit the nail on the head, which is the more aggressive it is, the format, the worse it gets. The fake answer is curse the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Canadian guy Achilles, and for playing Once Upon a Time in the deck, and really pushing it towards that. By the way, really like that player. Haven't seen him in a while, but there's a debate about Once Upon a Time or Sylvan. I think Achilles would play like 1 Sylvan in the board for the Tundra matchups, but that was about it. And the other reason to run Sylvan is if you were to look at a mana curve, you're not running Mystic, you're not running Thalia. What 2-drop options do you actually have? And mana curve is something that's often overlooked, but you have to or you ought to have a turn 1 play, a turn 2 play, and a turn 3 play. And if you have all turn 3 plays, if they kill your mana dork, then you're really far behind. I think it's the best 2-drop, and especially in a clunky deck like mine. I've heard people like Lomer Boy say you never board out Mox Diamond. Never ever board out Mox Diamond. For me, Sylvan Library is almost that, except maybe against Burn, but that's like about it for me. And the other factor is, I think Sylvan Library, it's green. So when you play a really greedy mana base, you actually will likely get to cast it. Where something like Thalia, if you're not playing the basic planes like a mad person, then you may not get to cast it.
That, talking about the mana bases, it's making me think of, with the Green Sun Zenith package, you get infinite tutor targets. Scrib Ranger's been in the deck. Like we talked about before, Scavenging Ooze is in the deck. We talked about bullets like Collector Oof. I know that Dukes is a Sylvan Safekeeper. I know that Dukes has talked about Questing Beast recently as an option against the One Ring. Why is it that, I mean, there's a Black Splash for Grist that has, as far as I know, been a staple as a one of in the deck since its printing, because you can Green Sun Zenith for it. Is there a reason, or is there just no creature that's ever been of value to dip towards blue? Because I'm thinking of the Green Sun Zenith deck in blue is the Yorion, like, Uro big Green Sun Zenith pile, which is just a bunch of good cards doing good stuff. But some of their bullets that dip into blue are things like Uro, or I mean, granted that is you need multiple blue pips on the back end, but stuff like Leovold comes to mind as like often targets. Is Icefang Coatl? I mean, I get that we need snow basics for that, but is there a reason why it's, I mean, maybe it's just my perception that blue creatures that are also green usually fall by the wayside when it comes to Maverick options on the splash?
I'll lead here. First card I would say would be you wouldn't splash it for a Green Sun Zenith target, but when it was legal, Oko, you had to play it. And the rule was, you know, kind of like what the gun nuts say, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. So it was the only way to stop a bad guy with an Oko is a good guy with an Oko. And we were able to.
And we were all the bad guys.
We were all the bad guys.
It turns out everyone was evil.
Are we the baddies? Yeah.
Well, yeah. But I was still a good guy in my mind. I think Leovold is something that you will occasionally see. I think it's a meta call. I'd have to go 5 color because I don't often splash black. 4 is reasonable. 5 is like, you know, what are you doing? Uro is good. I think Loam can get away with Uro because Escape is such a challenging thing to set up, as well as double blue is very hard to set up without Mox. And I could be wrong. I think that's about all I would say. Really just Leo.
Dukes, your country has sane gun laws, so maybe that metaphor was lost on you, but what do you think?
About the blue splash, not necessarily about the ridiculous gun laws.
Bant Maverick has I have a soft spot for Bant. I think Bant's one of the coolest color combinations. But I feel like whenever I've played Bant, it just hasn't shown up any of the weaknesses that the deck has. And one of the big ones that's kind of underestimated is decks that go wide. Like, you can have a 12-12 Knight, but if your opponent has like 6 Goblins, then they're just going to, get around that. So not having access to, say, Punishing Fire or Toxic Deluge or Plague Engineer, you kind of have things like maybe Engineered Explosives in Bant. You do have some cool cards. It has definitely seen play over time with cards like Meddling Mage, Flusterstorm, Lavinia. When Hull Breach was printed, obviously having that turn 2 is great. Obviously being able to take the full power level of Noble Hierarch, tapping for all 3 colors on color, is fantastic as well. And Michael Mapson actually had the question of, if you could unban a card for Maverick, what would it be? And I think if Maverick could only play it, it would be Oko, because then it would open up Bant as kind of a viable option.
But only if you could were the only ones that could play it.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. I like that ban situation.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
on Ban Sensei's top. I'm the only person allowed to use it.
It's a good
I
idea.
won't play Saga. Yeah, yeah.
Uro is obviously a great one. I have seen 4-color decks or sort of Abzan Splash Trop for Leo. Some decks don't even play the Trop and just rely on Green Suns and your Mana Dogs to tap for the blue. Obviously, there's small considerations like I think Maverick does try to go after blue decks. You have cards like Choke as well, which are very strong. So hitting yourself with those means you probably aren't playing them. But yeah, it's tough. I feel like when I play Bant and I come up against sort of a Bant control deck, they're just built so much better as a Bant deck that you just get outplayed pretty easily. Especially when you're using sort of Swords of Plowshares on an Ice Fang to get through with already drawn a card from the Ice Fang, can be quite hard. But I think in maybe like a Ren and 6 era where you had access to the blue blasts, that'd be kind of cool.
I know that. I mean, referencing the idea of what could come off the ban list, something that's sort of on the Moto ban list right now are all the 40k cards. And I know that Strass has been a big advocate for getting Moloch, finally into the format. What are your guys' thoughts on when Moloch actually comes in, how pivotal that'll be for the deck? But additionally, on the topic of Bant, there's also I believe the card is called is it Myconthorpe or something like that? It's the 1 blue-green 2/2 flyer that when it ETBs, you exile opponent's yard, and then it gets +1/+1 counters for the number of creatures. And I remember I bought a set thinking that was going to be a playable option, and then it hasn't really shown up in paper to my knowledge. But it's also not on Moto either because it's a 40k card. Let me actually pull up exactly what the name of the card is. But it was also in the 40k decks. Myconthorpe or something like that.
Malinthrope.
Malinthrope.
It is a 2/2 flyer for 1 a green and a blue, and it has Scavenge the Dead. When this enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Malinthorpe for each creature exiled this way.
So it's a Green Sun Zenithable way to exile a yard, and then it's a big flyer potentially. But granted, like that is also fighting for similar space that Endurance is fighting in, and so I wanted to see if you guys had. I take it that you haven't really thought too much about this card because it didn't seem to resonate. But if you want to talk about Moloch, I would love to hear your thoughts on where that would sit in current builds of Maverick that you both play.
Oh, okay, I'll take this. So definitely a one of for me. I think there are some versions, and I would be interested to hear what Dougal thinks about this. Once Upon a Time and Thalia, and having a removal spell that's a creature seems like it could fit. It has the tempo mindset of like you're playing a creature, you're exiling something, and you have a body. But in the lists that I play, I think with Punishing Fire, I think it's a sweet one of, and I feel like even a lot of the what are they called? Depths decks are playing one in paper. There's also quite a few cards for Painter, I think, in that set that are relevant, but definitely Moloch for us.
Yeah, if you look back on Maverick in general, John Stern has a SCG deck tech in 2012 or 2013, I believe, on YouTube, where he has Tarmogoyf as kind of the 2-drop in the deck, which these days has dropped out just because it is a beater, but that's it. It's just kind of a beat stick. So you have cards over time like Thalia, Gadoctique, Scavenging Ooze, Spirit of the Labyrinth in the 2-drop slot that are all kind of hate bears that if your opponent plays, a bigger creature, it can be pretty tough to get through. So I think having something like Moloch is really strong. Obviously, Grist has shown the power of having removal through Green Suns, and Moloch is a way to have that as well on turn 2, which is great. So there are a lot of times where I'll start with a Noble Hierarch and my opponent will play Mother Runes, and I'm like, oh, I don't have a Source of Plowshares. But if you have Green Suns, you can untap it and deal with the Mum. You can deal with a Delver. You can deal with a plethora of creatures. But I think it's really nice to open up that ability to be able to remove an early threat through Green Suns, or if you draw it, potentially even draw a card off it by pumping a bunch of mana into X.
Drop 7 mana into that guy and Ravenous for +1 card.
Yeah, especially with Cradle, you do have ways to get a bunch of mana together. I will be interested to see how it goes in kind of a red-green initiative shell. So I think that's where a lot of people want to try to play it.
Are there any cards that that specifically come to mind for you guys about things that when they were spoiled or when you were about to try it out, where you were like, this is going to be the absolute nut. This is going to be incredible. And then it just doesn't pan out, or it didn't pan out?
I got one. Wilson Refined Grizzly. Wilson Refined Grizzly is a 2-mana 2/2. This spell can't be countered. Vigilance, Reach, Trample, and Ward 2.
I'm amazed that you know this off the top of your head.
That is almost as many keywords as Questing Beast, which has every
that's a Questing Beast,
yes.
Yeah.
And it's
choose a background. Creature. Hold on. What background do you choose?
I don't choose one.
Wow.
I believe it's
Passionate Archaeologist.
That was also a joke that I'd pick up. But I thought this card was kind of cool for Delver, because if you play it turn 2, if they're holding up Bolt or Daze, they can't Bolt or Daze it. But just being a 2/2 was a little bit rough, because obviously having Reach is great, but if it's a 3/3 DRC or a 3/2 flip Delver, then you're just going to trade 1 for 1. So you do need ways to pump it up, and then you're probably playing things like Stoneforge for maybe swords and putting a sword on it, but then you're back on the Stoneforge plan. So sadly, Wilson just wasn't the beater that we wanted. But it seemed like there was just so much text on it that it was going to be relevant somewhere, but it just wasn't.
There was a green protection from blue Reach creature during I want to say Gate Crash that a lot of people were
Skylasher.
into. There it is, yeah, Skylasher.
2/2 for Reach, can't be countered. Flash and
Pro Blue.
Protection Blue.
Pro
right?
Blue.
Yeah, I bought foil copies of that too.
probably for at least 4 times what it would have been for not a foil copy. I know people were very hot on it for a second.
The rule. Oh, go ahead.
There's definitely the ongoing joke that any white creature printed gets a showing in Death and Taxes, and I feel like that's very similar for any green creature. Is this the new Green Suns target?
I think the rule in the Discord we always say with cards like the Skylasher situation is buy high, never sell, and it's good stocks. And
yeah, I have a few of those. I have Warrant and Warden that I think I bought 40 copies of at $1, and then it dropped to 20 cents.
Dunks.
I was like, this is going to be so good. People are going to play this. It removes an attacking creature from play, or bounces it to your opponent's hand, or makes a 4/4. And I was like, this is going to be all the rage in Standard. And that was $40. I just flushed down the toilet.
Been there.
Shout out to Higby on that one.
I think there was this weird Cyclone card that came out when Ren and 6 was out, and I was playing this exploration version of Maverick that I thought was going to be good, but it's too much. 2 with 3 mana. Courser of Crewfix had its moment, so I can't say it was a bust, but I definitely thought it was going to be a staple with Sylvan Library. Just the ability to gain some life as well as the filtering. And a card that wasn't spoiled, but I swear it's going to be good one day, is Granger Guildmage. Card from Mirage.
That's the one that pings it pings for red, shoots you back, and first strike.
Yeah.
I got that in my cube.
It's sweet.
Nice.
It has its moments. I really do well. After Bosch did really well at the SCG event, A lot of people are on breakfast, and that is a sweet Green Sun Zenith target to beat breakfast. So all the other ones that I thought, I probably forgot their names, but been there.
I'm gonna ask you guys a dumb Maverick noob question that I'm gonna guess 0% chance that you haven't been asked this before. But if Green Sun Zenith is so awesome and so good and so great and powerful and wonderful and amazing and worth building a site over, what makes it better than Eladamri's Call, which is a green-white instant speed tutor for any creature that you want, given that it would be a way that you can tutor, you can leave up mana at instant speed and then play the creature at sorcery speed like you would for Green Sun Zenith anyway, and the cost of the card, or the mana cost of the card, would be more or less the same in that you're still paying more than retail for the creature. Has Eladamri's Call ever been brought up as like Green Sun Zenith's 5 through whatever? Or is this me just being the control player and never wanting to tap my mana on my own turn?
I've definitely played around with a version with Aether Vial, which means you could still put the creature in, which is pretty cool. But I think getting the creature on the board is the biggest thing. And your opponent having to respond to the Green Suns. And a good example of this is against 8-cast, where a few times I've Green Sunned for 3, opponents kind of thinking and going, oh, Night of Autumn, cool. And then, of course, you can go and get Collector Oof instead.
It is extra
but if
less.
if you Eldamri's Call, your opponent knows about the card, which I think significantly takes away the impact it's going to have, because your opponent probably gets at least a turn to set up to kind of play around it a little bit.
You can get away with that with 8-cast because they're not playing Days.
Yes. Yet.
Yes.
Wow.
I think I'll go with the Mike Tyson line of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And there's a lot of really cool cards that you could imagine that would work. But the thing about 2 mana is it's twice as much as 1 mana. And that's huge when you think about the resources. Cards like Finale of Devastation, which is like another Green Sun Zenith kind of card that I had to look up. I remembered it. That card is one that's been mentioned. And I think ultimately what it boils down to is consistency, and the fact that, think about how good Demonic Tutor is. Green Sun Zenith, when searching for green cards, is 1 less mana than Demonic Tutor would be. So that's just kind of a hint at how good that card actually is.
Yeah, when you frame it like that, it sounds way more powerful. Yeah.
But you have to get a stupid green creature. That's like, you know.
So in the post Lord of the Rings world, what's the one kind of creature that you would love to have access to, like the effect that you would love to have access to with Green Sun Zenith that you don't, that you like run into in your matches where you're like, man, if Green Sun Zenith could get this effect that we're missing, what is that effect, and what cost would it need to be at or below in order to actually be effective?
Choke Bear. It's a 3-mana 2/2 that islands don't untap.
We are ending the call. Guys, I've had such a wonderful time talking to you.
Wrap it up.
Really, really wonderful time talking with you guys. I really enjoyed the Maverick Masterclass. Thank you so much. Choke Bear. I
believe that's what we call a hate crime.
That's a good double entendre. I like that. Wait, is it actually Choke Bear?
It's pretty good.
Do you have something in mind, Mark?
Green Sun Library.
Oh, like Magus of the
Yes.
Library.
Yeah, Magus of the Library. Except it's like once it touches the battlefield, it like becomes like Clothis or something. Like I don't want them
Clothis
sorting
is
it.
another card that's like sort of fallen off the face of the earth, right? Did you guys played a bunch of Clothis for a while, right?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, that card
Me too.
was good.
That was a great Rug Delver card.
Oh yeah, it would be.
I think my honest I think my honest answer is, and I think a lot of people think this, I really wish Leovold was Abzan, not Bug.
That's a good one. Thalia on a Green Sun? Just like your 5th Thalia. I'd play that too, even though it hurt me. I always used to joke about this before Thalia was like, maybe around the time of Thalia. I would get Gaddock and like Show and Tell would still kill me. And like I would just want a card that had the keywords of like Storm doesn't storm, Show and Tell doesn't show and tell, Doomsday doesn't doomsday. You know, just the words don't have to make sense. It just shut those decks off. I guess the last one would be like another endurance kind of card that was Mindbreak Trap. It's like a creature.
Oh, like you could sack it to Mindbreak Trap them?
Yeah, like maybe, you know, it's like a 3/4 for 3 mana flash.
Yeah, I remember thinking when it came out that it was going to find a home in some form of Maverick, but then, you know, I've learned from you guys today like the actual value of most creatures being green. But I remember when Knight Errant of Eos came out as a way to recoup cards and then also be good against potential combo decks by just silencing them on a combo turn so they could never actually move. I thought that was actually going to see a ton of play. I mean, it makes sense that it doesn't now after talking to you guys, that it not being Green Sun Zenithable is like too big of a cost. But I mean, I could see them eventually printing a silence effect that is also in green, or something that like gives you hexproof or something, right?
Exactly. Just you know, love Tony, hate his deck, but Tony Scapone definitely just something for that.
You both are Urza Saga bros, though.
True.
A Bear of Solitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be perfect. We already got the Null Rod, so yeah, we could get really creative here, but I think those are some good ones.
So final question, because we are coming up on time. Lord of the Rings. So not Devoted Halfling, not Bowmaster. What do you see in that set?
Delighted Halfling, right? Yes.
Yeah, Delighted Halfling, not Devoted Halfling. That's a whole different card. I just made up.
I'll go ahead and say the One Ring is way better than I thought. I have a habit of not reading cards, and then it takes the card being in play and doing things for me to be like, oh, I get it.
That definitely happened to me and Phil.
It's sometimes cards just have too much text, and I need to see it. The One Ring, that 4th card is not. That's a different set, right? 4th
Aerolingus is from the Commander product.
Set, yeah.
Okay.
That's bro. Let me just point out that we can talk about it real quick. It is definitely an upgraded Entreat the Angels in a world where we live in that like a big problem for anybody who's playing exactly my deck is Teferi Time Raveler, which shuts off the miracle mechanic. So haste is infinitely better than flash. And the world in which we live, 4th Aerolingus, is absolutely real, and it's sort of it's sort of only seen play in like the initiative decks and like somewhat of the 4-color control decks, but I think there's definitely space in just like a Jeskai classic draw go style control deck that like has the option to fireball and then just recoup cards on Monarchy.
Well, you've joked about changing your handle to 4th of Phil.
I like it. I think I played it in Maverick, and I've been seeing it in Delver.
Yeah.
So it's real.
It's one of those cards that's so hard to play against. Like you can't plan for it. It's very hard to plan against. I actually had a question for Phil, because on the last episode you were talking about the ring and tempting you. So a 3-part question. Do you think the tempting of the ring is legacy viable? Did you like it? And 3, I assume it's best in a creature deck.
I also have an answer to this.
to answer first off, I think the ring tempts you is powerful enough for Legacy. Because it is incidental enough on enough playable creatures without the ring tempts you that it just being tacked on as a bonus is the in my experience so far of testing Sam the Stout-Hearted, the way that it really behaves is it feels very similar to Stoneforge Mystic in that you get to level up all of your dinky creatures without actually having to take up a slot in your deck. So something that I remember of being like, oh wow, this is really powerful, is you have this ancillary effect outside of your deck, a la Companion, that having access to it without having it to take or having to replace a draw step is worth so much more than it seems at first glance. So in my opinion, for Sam the Stout-Hearted at least, which I can speak to from actually having experience, it's crazy to me that I haven't seen D&T decks in particular pick it up as a 4 from the get-go. Like, if ever there was a thing to rebuild D&T 4 and adding fetch lands to your mana base, it would be for Sam the Stout-Hearted. It just being a flash 2/1 that works with fetch lands and wastelands at a baseline means that the card is exceptionally good at just getting you through development, or anytime your opponent interacts with you in any meaningful way that would exchange a permanent off the table. I would have asked you guys about it earlier in the episode had I not learned from you how important it is that your green creature slots not be taken over by non-green creature slots. But the other part about Sam in particular, or that particular card with the ring tempts you, is if you have multiples, they sort of protect each other. And the play pattern that you get into is, let's say you have a wasteland on the table, or your opponent has a wasteland on the table, and you're aware that they have a Sam the Stout-Hearted. Let me rephrase. Your opponent has a wasteland on the table and know that you have a Sam, and that you've either picked up with Caracas. Somehow they know you have a Sam. They cannot fire off their wasteland because you have the Sam, because you just get to repick it up, which means that you get into a holding pattern where neither player moves. And when neither player moves, it's leveraging the player that's playing the deck that wants to go long. So if you're playing the grindy fair deck and you want the game to progress in some meaningful way into the later stages, that holding pattern is beneficial for you, not the opponent. So let's say if your Delver opponent wants to waste you and they can't because they can't interact with the Sam that's going to come down and just pick up the land and blank the wasteland, then they can't move on it. And that's really powerful. And it's not necessarily recognizable at first glance when reading the card. The other thing with Sam is that if you have multiples, you can turbo through the ring tempts you, because state-based actions are checked before you target. So when the second Sam touches, you state-based one of the Legend Rule 1 to the graveyard, and then you can target that one. So let's say you are on the first stage of Ring Tempts You, and you just have 4 open mana, and your opponent doesn't do anything. You can just cycle through 2 Sams and get to the 3rd stage, and then the 4th stage, and then you can level up, and now all of your dinky beaters are hitting for 3, and they're unblockable, and they're looting. It's a bunch of incidental effects that's similar to, like, if you have a Mother of Runes, and your opponent, if you have a Mother of Runes and, like, your sword on the table that you tutored up earlier with the Stoneforge Mystic, that sword represents every single creature being a lethal threat. And that's really strong, right? Like having to have every creature just be a must-remove target was really powerful. So in my mind, the Ring Tempts You is certainly viable for Legacy. It's already started to show up in the Esper control decks like we talked about last week. I don't know if there's space for it in Maverick, but it's something that I would recommend definitely testing, in that, like, it works in fetch lands and wasteland, which is sort of something that both of your guys' style of Maverick is already interested in doing. And it might actually be viable in that sort of 2-drop slot that's not a green creature that we were talking about with Sylvan Library as an additional way to interact. Because if your opponent interacts with you in any way, it's really meaningful. And the other thing that it does is the Ring Tempts You turning other non-legendary creatures into legendary creatures, obviously, of course, levels up your Caracas. And so if your Knight can tutor up a Caracas, and then you can flash in a Sam, tempt the Knight, and then bounce it in response to a removal spell and just blow them out and then redeploy, like, that's a really powerful interaction that, like, if your opponent's just not keenly aware that Sam is a possibility, then they just get blown out by it. But then if you don't have it, they still have to consider it and then either choose or not to play around it. And they may not on the threat of mana open plus, you know what I mean? So yeah, I would highly recommend giving it a go. It was impressive to me, and I was playing it in a less powerful, just blue-white control shell that was sporting like some Snapcaster mages and stuff, you know?
Well, another spot that it's seeing play actually is with Sauron's Ransom is in this new 80-card Yorion Death Shadow deck. And that's really interesting because if you can get your Death Shadow to be on the board where it's not not dying as soon as it hits the board, but it's like a 1/1 or a 2/2, then you could do things like attack with it, cast Dress Down, slam in like for a free like 13 damage to your opponent, and just being able to like get the extra card advantage of looting stuff. I mean, I think the ring tempts you, especially in that deck where you're able to put it onto your Baleful Strixes. You're playing orcs. You're basically now Death Shadow has gone from being basically like what was a Delver deck into like this sort of mid-range control creature deck. And so I think the ring tempts you is just like that added value that makes the deck like just that much more viable. Where we were never thinking about playing like an 80 card Yurion pile of blue-black cards before.
Yeah.
Dukes, two quick questions, Dukes. First off, did I answer all parts of your question?
Yeah.
Secondly, you reminded me of something that I wanted to talk about, which I am only more excited to talk about now after what we've mentioned so far on this podcast. The Lord of the Rings set, aside from the Ring Tempts You, introduced a bunch of very good-looking ETB green creatures between Samwise Gamgee. I want you to let's put that card up. But then also the other Samwise, Merry and Pippin, which are both green creatures out of the Commander product that have partner and can tutor for each other, that also have reasonable effects tacked onto them. So we're going to pull them up on the screen here rather than explain what each one of them does. But have you guys thought about these creatures at all in any capacity in terms of testing them? And if so, what have you considered?
No, but
Perfect.
Frodo Baggins was actually the card that I was going
interesting,
to talk about, which is green and a white for a 1/3 legendary creature. When it or another legendary creature enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. And as long as Frodo is the ring bearer, it can't be, it has to be blocked. So I think having like a green sunnable 2-drop that is a ring bearer is pretty strong.
So let me point out that I'm not sure if I have mentioned it before, but the one of the most powerful rooms or stages of the Ring Tempts You for non-blue decks, I think, is that looting. Because anytime you draw the Swords to Plowshares or something that's blank against an opposing deck, being able to turn it into another card is just so powerful. It just feels so good to be able to do that. But the other card, speaking on Frodo and stuff that's good with it, I know that we already play a lot of 3-drops. Have you guys considered the new green-white Aragorn? That every time a creature ETBs, you get to move counters around. Shall we pull that one up if that's not been brought up? It's quite good. I don't know if you guys have played against it yet, but in a fair matchup, nobody's beating that card if it stays on the table.
So this is a 3/3. Whenever the ring tempts you, you choose a creature other than Aragorn, and you can put First Strike, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink. You choose one of those? Yeah, one of those, and put that onto Aragorn. And then whenever one or more counters is put onto Aragorn, put one of each of those counters onto one other of your creatures. So you choose a creature other than him.
That's a lot. Let me send you guys the image here if we haven't looked at it. It's Aragorn Company Leader is the name of the card, and I have played against it in a casual setting, but it is very powerful. It's a 3-mana 3/3. So I'll send you guys the image for 1 second. So this is very good design-wise. It's good with Frodo in that it triggers whenever the ring tempts you, and every time a creature ETBs with Frodo, the ring tempts you, and then you can just start spamming all of these different kinds of counters given the situation onto your opponent or onto your other creatures and level them up similarly to what Frodo was doing to begin with.
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue I'd say is 3 mana dies to bolt. But if we move out of a Delver-ish meta, which we may be, I like this. Having to have one or more creature seems reasonable if you're playing Dorks or Bowmaster. So I could imagine that the tempt would be like another creature is something. It may not be your only creature. I think if the meta is creature versus creature, these kind of decks have a lot of play. It just sometimes, like, if you're getting attacked by like a Delver or a Murktide or just like a Gristlebrand, like all these cool cards really need setup. But man, that does seem like a force to be reckoned with if you get it going. I think I definitely do want to experiment with these. They're probably not that expensive online either.
I mean, they're very cheap in paper. For everybody who can't see, I've spammed our chat over here for Dukes and Strass with all of these green creatures like Pippin, Warden of Isengard, Mary, Warden of Isengard, which partner with each other from the new Commander set. Samwise Gamgee, which every time another creature, a non-token creature ETBs, you create a food, and then you could sacrifice 3 foods and pick up a historic card from your graveyard. And then I put one last card in here that I want to talk about before we wrap up, which is Feasting Hobbit, which when we were reviewing the set, Zach and I were talking about how this is the green Murktide, because a turn 1 Gilded Goose, there's our nice little a bop replacement for some food.
Mm-hmm.
Just going turn 1 Gilded Goose into turn 2 Feasting Hobbit is effectively an unblockable 5/5 for the most part, because Feasting Hobbit has Devour Food 3, which means that it gets +3 +1/+1 counters for every food that it devours as it enters the battlefield. And then creatures with power less than Feasting Hobbit's power can't block it. So a turn 2 5/5 and anything with less power can't block it. Dukes, why is Feasting Hobbit not just the greatest thing for Maverick since Green Sun Zenith was printed in the first place?
Look, it's tough because to not have a Hobbit in the deck feels unjustified. But it kind of runs into that Tamagoi effect where it's a great beater, but it doesn't disrupt. That's my only gripe.
Best way to stop your opponent from casting spells is to kill them.
It does disrupt their life total. Yeah.
I think it's just and I do want to test things before I ever have a definitive opinion about it.
For sure.
If I untap with Night, it used to be I feel like I win. I wouldn't say I feel like I win still, but it feels amazing. And it's a 3-mana card. Multiple 3-mana cards to me is a tall order unless the metagame is like Taxes, Maverick, Jund, Jerk's not playing 1-mana instant speed Wrath of Gods.
Yeah, I hate those guys.
Yeah, they're the worst.
Worst, absolute worst among us. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if the meta does come to even like say 8 cast, I can imagine some of these having some game against 8 cast, because that deck fights you, when it kills you. So that's really the big thing. I think so long as we're playing MTGO, there's going to be Tony, there's going to be the reanimate people, and there's going to be the cooks and the delvers, and it's a tall order to have more than one creature on the board. So I do want to test it before I say anything definitive.
Well, before we drop off, guys, where can people find you guys at? We're gonna get your links. We're gonna put those below. But for people that are just listening, where can people find you at?
I'll go first. I definitely think Dougal has the big presence. Done so much for the community. I think even if I've been playing Legacy a little bit longer, I think his footprint is larger, and I think the community that he's built on his Discord and in Twitch, just in general, just an all-around great person. But for me, right now, it's just on Twitch, in Discord. I don't have social media. There was too many pictures of me holding a red cup or worse. So those, maybe I could just make like a separate thing, but the ones that I had in college and stuff are not appropriate. And I think definitely just want to encourage people to, support the things that you like, things like this podcast, things like Twitch channels. And if you could do it, the Buffalo Chicken Dip Legacy, those big events that people are really putting together. Somebody who had a dad who was a store owner, it is hard. They could be doing other stuff with their time, and if we don't show up, they don't exist.
Amen to that.
Thanks for the kind words, Mark. Thanks for the kind words, Mark. Means a lot coming from you. Yeah, Dukes on Twitch. It's DOUGES on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Also the greensunzenith.com. And I do have an exclusive to share. If that's cool.
Yeah.
Boy,
For those of you who are
is
still
that
listening.
cool? It sure is.
If you've made it to minute 90.
So actually, the last 12 months, I've been doing Legacy weekends, kind of quarterly, which is 7 streams over 3 days, and usually have 7 Legacy guests on to co-host with. And I've rebranded that to the Green Suns Summit, which is happening on the September 8th weekend. And I haven't announced the lineup yet, but I will for you guys, because Mark is also involved.
Oh, wow.
So pretty cool. It's going to be Mark, Michael Mapson, Julian Nubb, Phil Gallagher, XJ Cloud, Pleasant Kenobi, and Goblin Lackey 1.
That's
Such a big piece of
that's
work.
a stacked list.
Really
Wow,
looking forward
what a
to that.
lineup.
Yeah.
But you heard
So-
it here first.
Yeah, you heard
Everybody
it here
joined the
first.
Green Sun Zenith, the Green Sun Summit.
Green Sun
that's the
Summit.
Green Sun Summit. What a lineup!
Awesome.
Hell yeah!
I love that.
I was
Awesome.
in it, and I didn't even know about the guests.
Nice.
Super secret up until just now. Yeah, that's amazing. What a stacked lineup. I think, I mean, there's not much we can do but close it from there. Guys, thanks so much for coming on the cast.
Thanks for
A
having
pleasure.
us.
Yeah,
real
it's a
pleasure.
blast. As always, you're welcome to come back anytime. Just hit us up. Everybody watching, do the thing, the internet thing, like, subscribe, all that stuff. That's it for us this week. Have a good one.
Connection won't be the same, so come on down. Ride, call me.